Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, this is a real pleasure. I've done a few other presentations in Peonia over the years to different groups, but this is the first kind of bona fide, live here, and just thought it'd be fun to do. This is a big story. 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days, and a lot of effort going into make this probably one of the best thought out, supplied, and executed expeditions of American history. And it got its hooks into me at a very early age. When I was probably 13, 14 years old, I just got fascinated with this stuff. I'm from the generation, with Fess Parker, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, Mike Fink and the Riverboat, all that stuff. And so it always clicked with me. And when I would read about these things, I wondered, how did they do that? Where did they acquire these things and these skills and these tools? And so through reading about this stuff, that's when, I'm also a jeweler. So I had a lot of galleries. Nadine and I did jewelry and sculpture for galleries, Santa Fe, Scottsdale, Sedona, Hawaii. We were all over the place with that. And so I'm pretty good with my hands. And so I would make stuff. I go, well, what is it like to make, a gun, a flintlock, or forge a blade, or, brain tan leather and sew an outfit? What does that take? And when you actually build those things and take the time to do it and learn it, it gives you a much deeper appreciation when you think, because I always joke and say, Lewis and Clark and all these early expeditions, all these guys did, built all these forts, built these boats, sailed the high seas, did all these things, and they did it all with cordless tools. Everything back then was cordless, right? I mean, wouldn't they have loved that 20-volt Makita, to run the screws in the boat or something? Yeah, everything was done by hand and with tools that were the highest technology that the day had to offer. But, it was still an amazing amount of labor. And a lot of those examples of those things still show up today. Like, I got one thing up here. I do have some things that are original. And this was like the tomahawk. Lewis and Clark, this was a very popular item. And so this is original to the expedition. Now, of course, it's old. So the handle's been replaced. So it's not the original handle. And the head has been replaced. No, I'm just saying, that's a joke. Yeah, but this is the style that they carried, and we'll talk about that. But I do have one thing up here that does date back to the expedition. And this was gifted to me by a client who had it for many years. And it's one of the original Lewis and Clark journals. And I don't send this around for public consumption because this is a third edition by Patrick Gass, Sergeant Patrick Gass. We'll talk about him a little later on. And this is the 1811 version, and it even has pictures in it. This was one of the first journals to ever have pictures. And they were woodblock prints, and they were very basic. Like, oops, that's just when it was, when I got it. Yeah, just these really simple, I'll just walk down and you can see how simple they are. But they were, described by the person that was there, Patrick Gass, who wrote a very good journal, and it was the first one published. Lewis and Clark's didn't get published till 1814. Patrick Gass came back, his first one was in 1807, and then 1809, and then 1811, and they sold out, they were $1 a piece. And so to find one of these today in decent shape is almost impossible. And so I don't pass this around because I went on eBay, which was a big mistake, and found a seller in North Hollywood was selling this for $16,000. So I just like to show it, but I don't pass it around. It's just too old. The paper is too old. I did have it rebound when we were over in England a few years ago, found an amazing bookbinder that did a beautiful job right down to the old leather and the gold on the sides. And it's a very accurate journal of what happened on the Lewis and Clark expedition because he was there. And that brings me to the next thing. People say, well, how accurate is this information you're sharing? Well, let me give you an idea. The book Les Miserables. How many are familiar with Les Miserables? 420,000 words. How about War and Peace? 585,000 words. How about the Bible, Old and New Testament combined? 785,000 words. Well, how much did Lewis and Clark write? How much was recorded in this 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days? 1.2 million words by people that were there. And so is it accurate? Yeah, it was firsthand. Now, not all the journals contain the same information because, you know, if you've been on a trip or even on a road trip and somebody goes, oh, look, there's an eagle out there. Well, the people on this side of the bus didn't see it. So they're not going to write about it, but the people over here are. So everybody sees something a little different, take something a little different home from that trip. So there is, these journals have been reproduced. The field notes, they were in these kind of a steno pad. Here's the originals. Oops. Some of the letters. But again, some of them have drawings in them as well. I'll pull this up for the people at home. Hey, nice jacket, I like that. So here's some of the artwork. And Lewis was a little more finicky of a writer. He had some writer's block. There was months where he didn't write anything. And a lot of times he plagiarized William Clark's. And part of that was not really plagiarism. It was in case one set of journals got lost or destroyed, they'd have a copy. So people say, oh, well, he plagiarized. Well, no, it was just to make sure it was accurate. How did they keep these safe? Well, they kept them in watertight metal boxes. And so there's just a little tin box for holding journals, has a leather seal in the top. You just grease it up with some tallow or beeswax, close it. I set this out in the rain and it keeps things absolutely dry. So they have 38 of these journals in these tin boxes. So what I'd like to talk about today is we'll just set the stage just a little bit before we get into all the show and tell on the table. Now, I need a lozenge here. Where is it? Okay. Yeah, just to kind of set the stage of how this all came to pass, we have to talk a little bit of world history, and that being Napoleon Bonaparte. Okay, he's Emperor of France, and he's got an idea that he's going to rule the world. So he's going to have this purchase, this Louisiana territory. It was called the Louisiana Territory because way back, even before Napoleon, in 1682, a guy by the name of Robert LaSalle, he's French, he comes down the Mississippi, he crosses over to the west coast, the west side of the Mississippi River, drops to one knee, takes off his hat, crosses himself, and claims it all for France. And that's why we call it the Louisiana Purchase, named after Louis XIV. So that was in 1682. They kept it till the mid to late 1700s, and then France ceded it to Spain. Spain ceded it back to France. Napoleon gets it. He's supposed to cede it back to France or back to Spain, but he doesn't, because in the meantime, he's trying to establish a colony in what we now know as Haiti. And in 1801 and 2, they have a huge slave revolt in Haiti. And Napoleon loses 35,000 troops to this revolt and yellow fever and all kinds of things. So his army is wiped out. And he says, if I can't control this island empire of Haiti, how can I expect to control? I'll answer that. How can I expect to control this vast tract of land? You know how big Haiti is? Like the size of Rhode Island. You know, and here's this massive tract of land. This is all the Louisiana Purchase right here. So he decides, I need some money. I'm going to sell it. He's not going to give it back to Spain. He's going to sell it. Thomas Jefferson says, I'll take it. How big is it? Not really sure. We now know it to be about 830,000 square miles. At the time of Lewis and Clark, the United States was 17 states. This would add 15 more in totality or in partial land area. Our population at the time of Lewis and Clark was about 6 million. And of the 6 million people that lived in the United States in 1803, 85–90% lived within 50 miles of the eastern seaboard. So we're a very coastal nation. So at this stage of the game, Thomas Jefferson sends 2 envoys. One will become our 5th president, James Monroe, another man by the name of Robert Livingston. Those 2 men will get the job done and will purchase the Louisiana territory. Now, the original intent of the sale was this right here. All Jefferson wanted was the mouth of the Mississippi, New Orleans. That was the original purchase, was this right here, just about the size of my pointer there, for 10 million bucks, because then you could control everything coming down the Ohio and Tennessee rivers coming down here, because everything got transported up here to Chesapeake Bay and then distributed. There were no roads over Appalachia. So the mouth of the Mississippi and the port of New Orleans, Alexa, turn on the map. There we go. Hi, sweetie. So that was the whole big thing, was just to secure this port. And so when our two emissaries were over in France dealing with Napoleon's emissary, a man who's going to cut the deal, he says, tell you what, instead of just selling you this for 10 million, we'll give you the whole thing for 15 million. So they had to make an executive decision. They couldn't call, they couldn't do anything. No mail went faster than a ship could sail, or a man could run, or ride a horse. And so they, on the spot, they said, we'll take it, 15 million bucks. So they more than doubled the size of the United States at the stroke of the pen, and that deal was consummated and made public to the American people on July 4th, 1803, and said, we just made this massive advance here and just bought this huge tract. Now, I'm sure you've all bought land at one point or another, or a house on a piece of land. So when you're going to buy that piece of land, what do you want to know about it? Everything. But what's some of the main here? Water rights. What else? Minerals. What else? The boundaries. Yeah, you want to know, where's those corner pins? Is that barn on my property? Is this easement mine? Well, on the Louisiana Purchase, there were no survey pins. There were none. The only thing that they knew was the eastern border was this Mississippi River right here. The western border, they call the Stony Mountains, the Great Stony Mountains, we call them today the Rockies, the Continental Divide. The northern border, you can see here, cut off by our present day border with Canada. That was kind of nebulous. And if you look at 20 different maps of the Louisiana Purchase, where it goes through here, through the corner of New Mexico and Texas and Oklahoma, it's different on every map. That's just Texas. It's just always different. But this was unsecured territory. So this area right here, that's all kind of in this yellow, that's the Louisiana Purchase, 830,000 square miles. This is the United States at the time of Lewis and Clark in 1803. This is all Spanish territory. And so Spain, this is, their northern colonies. Then this up here was called Oregon country, or Oregon territory. Everybody wanted that. Spain wanted it, France wanted it, the Russians wanted it, we wanted it, because it was purported as this kind of like Garden of Eden. If you've ever been up into the Portland, Willamette Valley area, very temperate, you can grow anything there. It's kind of like here, it doesn't get quite as cold up there, but they grow a lot of things up there. And so it's and timber, salmon, all kinds of natural resources up there. So everybody wanted this region here. So this was not called the Northwest. The Northwest was this right here. Because if you live here, this is the Northwest. So that's called the Old Northwest. This was just simply Oregon territory or Oregon country. So Jefferson's main thing, he becomes our third president in 1801. He's going to serve 2 terms, so 1809. And when he'd already tried 3 other attempts when he was Secretary of State and Vice President under Washington and under Adams, he had tried to get some expeditions to head out west to do this same thing. One of them was William Clark's oldest brother, George Rogers Clark. And if you read any American Revolutionary War history, George Rogers Clark is a very prominent name in the western frontier of the American Revolution. He basically won the western campaigns for the American Revolution against England. And so but George Rogers Clark was too old. Another guy, André Michaud, was a French spy. And another guy, John Ledyard, was just a wacky thrill seeker. And we don't have time to even talk about him. His story goes on forever. But Jefferson was so enamored with this concept of all this land out here. He just wanted to get out there and see it. But now he's president. Now he's got the resources, the money, and the position to make it happen. So who does he call upon to pull this off? A personal friend, a Virginia gentleman, an officer in the U.S. Army, and a neighbor, Captain Meriwether Lewis. Now, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about William Clark yet, because he doesn't come into the picture until a bit later, a year after. But we will get to talking about William Clark. So Lewis, he and Jefferson hires Lewis to be his personal secretary in the White House. The White House was not yet finished. And so Jefferson is already a widow. He and his wife, they'd only been married. They married when she was 23. She died when she was 33, Martha. They had 6 children in that 10-year time span, and it just wore her out. And she just did not live very long. So Thomas Jefferson was about 7 years older than her. So he's a fairly young widower. And out of his 6 children, only 2 will live to adulthood. One daughter, Martha, lives to be about 60. The other one only lives to be about 28. So the other 4 children all died either at birth. One little boy unnamed dies at birth, and then 3 other daughters die from 1 to 3 years old. So Jefferson is in the White House by himself, and now he's got Lewis in there as his confidant. And I mean, they're rattling around in that place like 2 BBs in a boxcar. You know, I mean, they're having dinners and they're entertaining people. Jefferson, as many of you probably know, was our ambassador to France for quite a few years. So he's quite the Francophile, brought everything from Paris back to Monticello. He just loved all that French culture and fashion and food. And one of the things he brought back, and a French chef to prepare it, and if you got invited to Jefferson's table, it would be quite a treat. And maybe you can probably go to somewhere here in the North Fork and get this delectable treat that Jefferson brought from France. And he even brought the chef and the tools to prepare this special meal. And it's a pasta meal, and it's called macaroni and cheese. Anybody ever had that? It cracks me up now. You go to these brew pubs, right? We did a lot of them on the cruise in the Northwest. And you go into a brew pub, and they've got a little thing of mac and cheese with all these, you know, Tillamook cheese and this cheese and that cheese for $16 for mac and cheese. You know, when I was in junior high, it was like, I don't want that on the cafeteria line, right? And so, but yeah, Jefferson brought that back. So anyway, they're plotting and planning. And so Jefferson, another thing he was the president of, not only of the country, but an outfit in Philadelphia, our oldest scientific institution in the US, the American Philosophical Society, the APS, our oldest museum and society in the US, founded by none other than Benjamin Franklin. And so this was the age of enlightenment. We don't have time to get into that right now, but just suffice it to say, this is where science started playing a big role in how things work. Okay, so the age of enlightenment was kind of scientific disciplines that Jefferson was very keen on. He had a very eclectic mind and wanted, on this expedition, he wanted everything done really, really well. And what's always amazing to me is with all these different journals and stuff that I've read and these different explorers is how much Lewis and Clark mimicked Captain James Cook of Yorkshire, England, and the way he ran his trips, his 3 world voyages. Maybe that's another talk I could give here, even though we're nowhere near the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii, but the pioneers of the Pacific and Captain Cook and the others, there are phenomenal stories. And so Jefferson had gotten Cook's journals and said to Lewis, read these. This is the way I want it done, scientifically to the T. So there was precedent for it. The other reason Jefferson was real keen on getting a group of American explorers out here was that there was a Scotsman by the name of Alexander Mackenzie. And he went across from central Canada to Bella Coola, BC, British Columbia on the Pacific, what we now know as the Inside Passage. He did that in 1796, and he went by land. And he made it all the way out, it's off of this map, but he made it, you know, to the Pacific out here, wrote maps, did journals. Jefferson got a hold of them and said to Lewis and Clark, read these. The British and the Scots are already out there. We've got to get cracking here, boys. And so, and even when Lewis and Clark would write that they got to the Pacific and they wrote by land, they were plagiarizing Alexander Mackenzie's inscription that he did on a rock in Bella Coola, where he said, Alex Mackenzie, 1796, by land. So that wasn't an original thought. And guess what else he did that Lewis and Clark copied? He took a dog with him. Alexander Mackenzie took a dog with him as well. So Captain Lewis will take a big Newfoundland with him. So all these things are starting to put some pressure on Jefferson. So he says to Lewis, here's some letters of introduction, and I'm going to send you up to Washington, and you're going to meet the finest scientific minds in Philadelphia, Washington, and Boston, and you're going to learn everything you can. Lewis has a crash course in zoology, entomology, paleontology, medicine, botany, astronomy, celestial navigation, all this in 2 months. How many of you are proficient with a sextant? Yeah, it takes a little bit of practice, and especially back in the day. This was new technology, so a lot of this stuff, Lewis had to learn it all, and Jefferson said there is no man more suited to this than one Meriwether Lewis. So Lewis goes up there and he meets all these people, and we don't have time to get into all of them, but before he gets up there, we'll get into some of these things he picked up along the way. Number one being, if you're going to go out there, when they first started talking about this expedition, Lewis thought, I could probably pull this off with about 15 guys. Okay, eventually they would have, or ultimately they would have about 60. That would be whittled down to 33. They made it all the way to the Pacific. And that was a plan. But initially it was, going to be 15 people. And that plays out because when Lewis heads from Washington, he goes up to Harper's Ferry, Virginia. And there he's going to go to the arsenal there, the Harper's Ferry Arsenal. And he's going to pick up 15 1795 contract rifles. He's also going to pick up 15 knives. I forgot to put on my bag here. He's also going to pick up 15 shot bags, and he's going to pick up 15 powder horns. So, and 15 tomahawks. So how many people do you think he's planning on taking? Yeah, 15, pretty simple. And so one of the things he picks up are these rifles. Now, the difference between a rifle and a musket, anybody know? What's the difference between a black powder rifle and musket? Rifling, yeah, lands and grooves cut inside the barrel. If it's a rifle, it has rifling, which is a series of lands and grooves cut in a spiral twist like a corkscrew. So when the ball comes out, it's spinning, just like a well-thrown football pass. What do they call it when the quarterback drills it like that? And he says, he threw a spiral or a bullet. Last time I watched football was Green Bay Packers, Dick Butkus, those guys. This is a long time ago. I can't even tell you who won the Super Bowl. I don't care. But when they throw it really hard and fast, and you see the spiral going around, they call it the bullet. Because it's just like a bullet, flat trajectory and right where you want it to go. Same thing here, spiral twist. If it's a smooth bore, it's a musket or a shotgun. That means everything's just going to come out and hit where it may, okay? So Lewis buys these 15 rifles. They are 54 caliber, so a little over ½ an inch in bore. They are a flintlock. So how many folks here have shot a flintlock? 2. When I used to give these talks years and years ago, almost like all but 2 hands went up. And now it's like, nope. So that's just changing times. But the reason you'll hear a lot of these terms that, and I like it when people say, no, I've never shot a flintlock, but all these terms. How about, yeah, they bought that lock, stock, and barrel. Okay, that's a gun term. That's from dating way back, because you could buy just a lock from a locksmith. You could buy a barrel from a very renowned barrel maker. And then you could buy the stock and have it all fitted together, or you could just go into a shop and go, I'll take that one right there, lock, stock, and barrel. Buy the whole thing, ready to go out the door, $20. So there's one term. Another one is the way you load these things. This is called a flintlock, and I'll just do it real quick for the mechanism here. Now, these are not real guns. My real guns are at home because things get dropped and things that I don't like the real ones hitting the floor. But the flintlock mechanism is really pretty simple. And you have the hammer here that moves back and forth. And then you have this part here called the frizzen. And in the hammer of the flintlock, in this little gooseneck piece here, there is a piece of flint. This is what arrowheads are made out of. You can find it all over the ground here. So a little piece of flint is napped into a little chisel-like point. And it's going to intersect in its arc. When you pull the trigger and it comes down, it's going to hit this part right here, which is hardened steel. That's called the frizzen. So I've always got to look around and see if I can find somebody with frizzy hair. Anybody have, yeah, you got frizzy hair. And so, did you know that's very French? Because the French word frisé means to curl. So if you have frizzy hair, it's not just like it's just crazy, but frizzy hair is curly hair. So what does that have to do with a flintlock gun? Well, when the piece of flint comes down and hits the frizzen, it carves off little curls of steel, hot steel that makes a spark. And there's the next one. You know, everything is a flash in the pan. You've heard that one, right? So let's go back to how you load this thing. It's a muzzle loader, so how do you load it? Through the muzzle. So in order to do that, you have to have your powder horn. Powder horns were really very personal items, and there's a lot of collectors. You know, some people collect guns, some people collect pottery, some people collect any number of things, but there's quite a few people that collect nothing more than powder horns, because a lot of them have scrimshaw and artwork on them. This one, I love the phrase on here. It really fits here in the North Fork Valley. A man of words and not of deeds is like a garden full of weeds. So a man of word and not of deed is like a garden full of weeds. So sometimes they would do a phrase like that, or maybe a family lineage, or a map, or a scrimshaw picture of the home place, maybe their wife or sweetheart, you know, and dates and that kind of thing. They simply open up your powder horn and you dump the powder down there. And this is, again, 54 caliber gun, 50 powder, 50 grain charge. Pour that down. That's a fairly lightweight charge, you know, 50 grains, you know, small game, you know, coyote size. Let's say you dump in another 100 grains of powder. That's going to do a mule deer, an elk, bighorn sheep. But Lewis and Clark, when they got, you know, in April of 1805, when they got up into eastern Montana, they were just amazed by the tens of thousands of animals that they saw. Just bison alone, uncountable. And so I said, well, another 50 grains. Now you're up to 150 grains of powder in here, because Lewis and Clark saw these, what Lewis called these most terrible gentlemen. What am I talking about? Grizzly bears. Because when you got that many bison running around and drowning in the river and dying, and bison giving birth to little calves, and the grizzly bears are a plains animal. We now know them to be an animal in the forest, right? You spend any time in Alaska, you know, they're up there, they're in the woods, but they traditionally were a plains animal. A grizzly bear can outrun a quarter horse in a burst. So by the time you think, should I run from this grizzly? If he's at the back corner of this room and it takes you 2 seconds to process, to fight or flee, he's right here. Because he doesn't have to think that way. He just sees you as a meal. So a grizzly bear can run so extremely quick that Lewis and Clark just said, wow, these bears are all over the place. And they started shooting them, because it's a bunch of young guys with state-of-the-art guns, right? So they said, let's shoot that one. So the first one they shot it twice through the lights. What are the lights? No, not the eyes. You would think it would be the eyes. The lungs. This big sow grizzly weighed in about 600 pounds. They shot her 11 times before she finally collapsed after chasing them a half a mile. And the men jumped off the bank of the river into the safety of the river and swam for the other side. So after that happened a few times, the guys all got together and had a little huddle. And the captain said, is our curiosity been satisfied as to the ferocity of this beast? And the men were like, yes, we're good. We're not going to shoot any more bears. And because they said they were so hard to die, even with 11 rounds through them. The average was 7 rounds to take down a bear with, you know, a ball this size being delivered, usually at pretty close range. And so after all the powder's down there, you put the patch on top. You take the ball, you put the ball on there, you pull out the ramrod and you push the powder, or you push the patch and ball. The patch acts as a gasket, sealing the ball against the inside of the board. Pull the ramrod out, replace it. You don't want to leave the ramrod in there, because if you fire it with the ramrod in the gun, it's like a 36-inch long wiffle ball. It just goes, and it makes a lot of noise and it gives a heck of a kick. So you got all the powder, patch, and ball in here in the breech. but you're not ready to fire yet. So now you have to pull the hammer back to half cock. That means you can hit the trigger all day long. There's another one. Everything that guy, he's always going off half cocked. What does that mean? Not quite ready, right? You think something's going to happen, but he's at half cock, he's at safety, it's not going to happen. So now the frizzen gets pushed forward, and right here underneath the frizzen is a little pan about the size of a baby spoon, and that's called the flash pan. And so that little pan right there has a hole that is drilled in the side of the barrel, and what's on the other side of that hole on the barrel? That 150 grains of powder, right? So there's the flash pan, and then the touch holes right in the side. You ever seen a cannon fired at a reenactment? It's always fun to see the people that don't know what's coming. When the cannon goes, they hear somebody say fire in the hole, and they go, what did he say? Kaboom! And everybody hits the deck. So there's the pan right there, and there's the hole right there with the powder on the other side. And so now you have to prime the pan. And so the frizzen goes forward, you prime the pan, then you close the frizzen on top. You want to make sure that you put the cork back in your powder horn, because if an errant spark flies and lands in your powder horn, you now have a 1.5 pound pipe bomb on your side here. And that's one of the ways they identified Captain Cook's body in Hawaii when he died, is they sent back his hand, the natives did. And it was terribly burned because he had a powder horn explode on his side when he was a younger man. And his hand was terribly scarred and burned. And they went, yep, that's our captain's hand, all right. Recognize it anywhere. And so it was a very real danger. So you want to make sure you put the cork back in there. Then you pull it back to full cock, and now you're ready to go. Joe, do you have that apple I gave you when you walked in? You could just set that right up there. Maybe we'll use Deborah. She's a smaller target. I'm better at smaller targets far away. 9 out of 10 times I hit it. But yeah, so then you take aim, and when you pull the trigger, I'll show you again. When you pull the trigger, you can see the mechanism here. The hammer flies forward, the flint hits the frizzen sparks, the frizzy little curls of hot steel fall into the pan flashes, ignites, goes through the touch hole, and the ball goes out. Now, I can't demonstrate that in here, but I can send around a picture. And this is what it looks like. And if you look at this real close, you can see the smoke here from the pan. My face is obscured because it's right there, but it's going that way. The blast coming out of the muzzle, the ball has already hit its target. Okay, so when everything is working good, your powder's dry, frizzen's clean, flint is sharp, it's instantaneous. It's not like whoosh, click, boom. Sometimes you do get that. That's called a hang fire. And you got to be careful about that because, oh, sorry, we can pass it over there. But a lot of times with a hang fire, people shoot a gun and the pan flashes, and there's another one of those terms. Everything that person does is nothing more than a flash in the pan. Well, what does that mean? You're expecting a whole lot. You're expecting boom, and for that elk to drop, and all you get is this, and no boom. And I've seen this happen at shooting ranges. Guys go, flash in the pan. Oh, these old guns. There's a couple on the internet. You can watch them. Guy literally looking down the barrel of his shotgun, like something's jammed, and it goes off and blows a hole right through the bill of his ball cap. That was a come to Jesus moment for him. I can guarantee you that. Okay. So we've got Lewis buys these guns. We'll talk about another purchase he made there a little later when we get him up into the Rockies. But then Lewis gets to Philadelphia, and he's going to meet all these scientists up there that are going to teach him all those different areas of study that I mentioned. The only one we really have time to talk about. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was our nation's first Surgeon General. His name was Dr. Benjamin Rush. Very good, Maryland. And so Dr. Benjamin Rush, no relation, I'm sure. He was known for, wrong pill bottle here. He was known for Dr. Benjamin Rush's restorative purgatives. Hayes Drugs used to sell these up until just a little while ago. Just kidding. Because back in the day, they thought that if you were out of sorts, it was because one of your four humors or all of your four humors were out of whack. What are the four humors? Anybody know? From when you went to medical school or anything like that? Okay, it's black bile, yellow bile, urine, and blood. And you can also kick in saliva, so what they wanted to do back then was to purge your body of all those things. So they gave you purgatives to make you either throw up or have the most severe case of the squirts that you've ever had in your life. So Dr. Rush came up with these pills. Suffice it to say, Lewis for $5 bought 600 of these pills for $5. They were a mix between Epcac and X-Lax. That's the best way to put it. So these will get you going almost instantly. Lewis said the men talk about the efficacy of these pills, and it is so fast, the men quickly gave these a new name and called them Dr. Rush's Thunderbolts. Because when you took these, it was like, I'll be right back. Because you had to run and make a run for the woods because it was going to be going through you pretty quick. So once that they would administer those pills, if that didn't help, then the next thing was a very common practice of the day. It was kind of Benjamin Rush's hallmark practice, and it's still in use in some parts of the world today. But Dr. Benjamin Rush was really good at it. And how many of you remember the movie Don Quixote? And his helmet that he wore, that Don Quixote wore. Anybody know what it was? Remember, it had a crescent cut out of the front. Remember, it was a big pan. It was a barber's bowl. So when you got a shave, they'd lather up your neck, and that crescent in the bowl was put along your neck there, so all the soap suds and hair and stuff didn't go down in your stand-up collar. Very uncomfortable. And so, but barbers, everybody pretty much, except for some of your kids, are old enough to know what was the two-color iconic sign out in front of the barbershop? A red and white spiral, right? Spinning around. That replicated or represented what? Blood and bandages. Because barbers were also small-time surgeons. You jerked a thumb off, or had dropped an axe into your calf, or did something. They could sew you up. They were used to those medical arts, and so barbers could do a shave, or they could do bloodletting. And so this crescent here, what they do is they would, after you've been purged and you were feeling pretty wrung out, they'd roll up your sleeve, put a tourniquet on, pump it up, get your veins to poke out. Then they'd hold that bowl right there. Then they'd pull out a fleam, has 3 blades, and they'd pick the right suitable size fleam, and they would put the other ones away. This is an original oldie, by the way. And then they didn't cut this way. They cut along the vein longitudinally like that. And George Washington, in 10 hours, had 1 gallon of blood drained from him. The human body holds like 2 to 2.5 gallons. In 10 hours, they drained like 45% of his blood for a strep throat. Not recommended treatment, okay? And so they would bleed you and see how that did. Can you imagine going back to the doctor for the 2nd time for a follow-up? How you doing? I'm great. I'm great. I'm better than new. Who would go back to get another dose of those pills and to be cut again by? And the men said Captain Lewis is most vigorous in the application of what he learned from Dr. Rush. As soon as somebody said, "Oh, come on over here, young man," he did it a lot. And so that was another thing they did. One of the other things that Lewis carried on his medicine box, one of the all-time favorites back in the Old West, laudanum. Severe opiate. This will not cure anything. It'll just make you forget how much pain you're in. Okay, so this would just knock you out and make you feel a little more comfortable. The one thing that actually probably did do a little bit, a lot of the men suffered from malaria, including Meriwether Lewis, with the fevers and chills and hallucinating. So they had this stuff from South America called Peruvian bark, comes from the Quechua tree. And this bark has quinine-like properties. And so it didn't cure malaria, but it would relieve some of the symptoms. So Peruvian bark, either taken orally or as poultices, that was pretty good. Another one, I'll keep this delicate for the age of the audience here, mercury. Why would they take mercury? Mercury salve. A lot of you my age, remember when you got a scrape and your mom opened up the bottle of mercurochrome, right? And it was red, right? And they put it on there and it stayed there for weeks. Well, this was a mercury or mercurochrome salve, natural antibiotic, but that's not what they took it for. They didn't take it for scratches on their knees and elbows. This was, let me just put it this way. They said, if you choose to spend an evening with Venus, you will spend a lifetime with Mercury. So if, there was a lot of promiscuity, a lot of STDs, some sexually transmitted diseases. And so this was used to treat the men for the venereal diseases that they had along the trip, which was a few. But now on the historical note, if you ever get up to Lolo Pass, Montana, anybody been to Lolo Pass, Montana? Just kind of a big truck stop gas station, but takes you over the Lolo Pass, the Bitterroot Mountains to the west. And there's a Lewis and Clark interpretive site there. And when they were doing excavations there, trying to see where it was called Traveler's Rest, they camped there on the way over and the way back over the mountains. And a guy was mowing the lawn one day and he noticed this big kind of rectangular depression in the ground. And he thought, that's odd. And it was just so perfectly laid out. And they found some old fire rings. And so they started doing some samples in the soil. And when they tested the soil, they found in that long rectangular pit was traces of mercury. There was nowhere else, just in that long pit, because it was the latrine for the Lewis and Clark campsite. So as these guys are being treated with this, and then using the latrine, they were peeing out, traces of mercury. It's a heavy metal, doesn't go away. So the little brochure up there at that interpretive center says, this is the only place in the world that you can see this. Well, yeah, it's the only place Lewis and Clark were, where they built that fort. And so anyway, they did find some traces of that, but other campsites are harder to find. And then my all-time favorite medicine that they had, medicine used to come in different color bottles. The color denoted, certain things in the medical pharmaceutical realm. And small, odd-shaped cobalt blue bottles were always associated with poison. And so these little bottles that had odd little shapes like this. So if you reached over your nightstand, they didn't have night lights, right? So you reached over, you're having a little angina or whatever, and you grab that and go, oop, wrong bottle. That's the poison. Here, honey, this one's yours. Just kidding. This one, can you read what it says on there, Marilyn? Not to be taken. This one says the same thing, but what's the icon on there? Skull and crossbones, which means death. So what is this? It's arsenic. But there was a time when this was a medical treatment. They figured if you just took a little bit of that and it made you go, it's got to be doing something. If a little is good, maybe a little more is better. And you take too much, he died. And so arsenic was on their trip, and Lewis almost overdosed himself on a natural deposit of arsenic that he found just in a rock layer, and just took a big dollop of it and went like a chew and just almost died. So arsenic was a common thing back then. Another thing they took along the trip was, we'll talk about the guns a little bit. They took these canisters, 52 of these. They weighed 12 pounds apiece. There was 8 pounds of gunpowder inside and a 4-pound lead canister sealed with a cork. And so they had 52 of these. So it's close to 1,000 pounds of lead encasing this 8 pounds of powder. And powder to lead ratio is 2 to 1. So if you've got 4 pounds of lead, you need 8 pounds of powder to shoot it. And so these canisters Lewis had made up for about 50 cents a piece, soldered up. So when the men's powder horns were getting light, they simply opened their powder horns and then put a funnel in there. And then they would pour the powder and fill everybody's powder horn. When this was then empty, what did they do next? They melted this down because it was about a 1/4 inch thick. They melted it down over fire. It melts at about 400 degrees. Then they take a little ladle and they dip the lead out of the pot and they pour it into this little tool. Looks like a set of pliers. And that little tool right there is a ball mold. And when you open it up, lo and behold, there's your 54 caliber ball. So it was a totally recycled project. The powder canisters, a lot of times they went over the sides of the dugout canoes, or a dugout canoe would hit a rock, split open. Canisters would go to the bottom of the Clearwater River. Why do you think it's called the Clearwater? Just take a wild guess. It's really clear. And so they saw their canisters down there and they sent one of the guys that was a better swimmer down there to retrieve them. And Lewis was overjoyed that the powder was as dry as could be. Because there's another one of those terms. Keep your powder dry. If you don't keep your powder dry, it's not worth anything to anybody. Now, I did mention that picture. Did it get all the way around of shooting? That same technique that is used to ignite the main charge in the barrel of the gun, the flint hitting the steel. I can demonstrate that to you because here is fire steel, a striker, and here's a piece of English flint. And so when you take the two of these and you strike them together, that's what it looks like when you initially pull the trigger on that gun. When you have that intersection of the flint and steel, those sparks are about 1800 degrees. They hit that, the pan flies open, sparks go in. But if all you want to do is start a fire, this is all you need. This and a little bit of tinder. And so on that photo, on the other side, how many of you looked at the other side? Good. Yeah, this picture was taken a little while ago when my beard was still really dark. And so, yeah, this is me just blowing up, just starting a fire with flint and steel. And once you know how to do it, I can get a fire going before you can find your big lighter and wad up enough newspaper to get it going. It's just all technique. And so you just blow into that. And again, getting your, keeping a fire going all the time. That was a really important thing. So a 3-fingered striker, a lot of times they were carried in a little box like this. It was called a striker-light. It had a double lid that had a magnifying glass. So on a sunny day, you could use the sun, to get your fire going. Again, I can't start fires inside because I only did that once, set off the fire department. And in Sedona, I had 3 engine companies come to the hotel. It took me a while to live that one down, especially since my brother is an arson investigator. And so that took a little bit of living down. A couple other things I want to mention here that they took on the trip. 300 of these piece metals in 3 different sizes. This was the medium one. They had small ones, medium, and then they had a large one. It was about 4.5 inches in diameter. What's on the front? A bust of Thomas Jefferson, 1801, President of the United States of America. And on the back, a pair of hands clasped together in peace and friendship. I'm going to pass that around, you may. And then what came with that was a certificate of loyalty. These were pre-printed. They took about 500 of these. And they had blanks. This was fill in the blanks of the tribe, the chief, the date. And it said they're in good standing. They taught them a special scout handshake. No, I'm kidding. But they, this was a thing that made the Indians realize you're now friends of the United States. So these peace medals were handed out. When they handed those out, what else did they collect from the Indians? The peace medals that had Louis XIV on them and King George III on them. They said, no, he's not the great white father anymore. This is the new guy in town. And we're the new people. We're the new show here. So, and the Indians are looking at this going, okay, when do we get the guns and the knives and that stuff? My wife loves the pendant, but I really would like one of those. So Lewis is getting all this stuff up there. And then Lewis, if I could describe the 2 captains, Lewis was the gadget guy. How many of you go to REI, Cabela's, Sportsman's Warehouse, all those kind of places, Orvis? Lewis, he would have been in his element there, and he got $2,500 from Congress to outfit this camping trip. So this money's burning a hole in his pocket. He's walking down the street in Philadelphia, and he sees this. And he's like, oh, gotta have one of those for the trip. How many of you have one of these? Okay, it's got a nice spiral point on it. Good way to grab onto it. Pumps back and forth. There's a hint. For making margaritas? No. What is it? Fishing rod? No. This is a pump. This is an air pump for an air rifle. Not a Red Ryder BB gun, but a 46 caliber repeater air rifle. This is probably one of the most amazing pieces of technology that Lewis and Clark carried on the trip. Notice the stock is metal, and it's got the magazine on the side here, holds 21 46 caliber balls. And so the way this worked was you unscrewed the air reservoir like that. And then you screwed this onto it. Pump. And then you found a tree that you just push that into and turn this into the tree to anchor it. So you could start pumping against that. Or you could just sink it down in the dirt and stand on it and just pump 1, 3, 500, 600, 700, 800, 801, 802, 850. You get up to about 900 pumps. Your biceps were like cantaloupes. You know, you're all pumped up. You have this thing up to 900 pumps and about 1,000 PSI. And so 1,000 PSI, what can you do with that? 1,000 PSI, that'll zing a ball out there quite well. So then there's a Schrader valve in here, what we call a Schrader valve today, much like a car tire. How much air pressure is in your car tires? 35. Okay, this is 1,000. This would blow the tire off the rim, okay? But it's contained in this cylinder. This was invented and built by a man by the name of Bartholomew Giardoni. He was a Swiss-Austrian watchmaker and gunsmith. And air rifles were very popular in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars and prior to. But a lot of places they were made illegal because number one, you saw that picture when I showed you that went around of all the, you know, the muzzle blast and the flash pan blowing out here. Somebody's standing in the woods and they fire a flintlock. You can go, he's right there. You can see it. But with this, how many of you shot a paintball gun? Nobody, not even a paintball gun? Even you kids? Yeah, okay, well, paintball guns are fired with compressed air. Okay, people, they play with them now. But this is kind of the same thing. When you pull it, just like that. No smoke, no loud noise. So it's silent. So back in the Napoleonic Wars, the early 1800s, who would like to have a silent rifle, 46 caliber, that's lethal? Everybody. Snipers. Yeah, snipers were a big thing back then too. How about poachers? Poaching on the king's land. That's a death penalty. So if you got something that's just a, and the stag goes down, nobody's none the wiser. So the way this works, it's got this magazine on the side. So it's a gravity feed. So you just push that block over. One ball drops into the block. You bring it back. The ball is now lined up with the breech. Pull the hammer back. Pull it back again. Push it over. Grab another ball. Pull it back again. Push it over. Grab another ball. A little bit faster than the powder patch ball, ramrod, prime the pan. This held 21 rounds. You could fire 2 full reservoirs on 1 tank of air. So that's 42 round semi-automatic in 1803. Pretty impressive. So impressive that Lewis made sure that whenever they met with the Indians, over 50 tribes they would meet with along the way, this was one of the first rattles out of the box that he brought out of their keel boat. Watch this. And Lewis was a marksman. Today, he'd be a SEAL team expert rifleman. That would be his classification today. This guy could shoot the eyes out of a snake at 100 yards. And so Lewis pulls out his gun. A goose is flying by. This is not a shotgun. This is a 46 caliber round. Puff of feathers and the goose goes down. Another goose. The Indians went, whoa. He didn't do, none of that. How did he do that? So Lewis said the desired effect was always achieved. They were mystified, they were amazed, and they were scared. Because they thought, if they all have one of those, we're done. We can't keep, where's that coming from? That kind of technology. So Lewis always showed this off, and he said it always achieved the desired effect with the natives. Other things, I know we're gonna be wrapping it up here. We started a little late, so are we good for like 5 more minutes? Okay, and then I'll ask for another 5. Okay. Lewis knew that they were going to meet a lot of tribes along the way. And so, true to many other explorers prior to him, starting with Christopher Columbus, Columbus even said when he reached the Americas, he said, the natives that we're encamped with on this island will trade the last morsel of food in their mouth for but a single bauble. Beads. And if you know anything about trade beads, or some of them are called Padre beads. Padre beads are about this size. Now, why do you think they're called Padre beads? Think Columbus, Padres. What's the connection? Rosaries, Padres, Columbus. So they go around, right, with every bead and say a prayer. The priests had their beads, and the Native Americans are looking at these colorful beads. You like those? Pretty neat, huh? How many have been to Mesa Verde? And you walk through the museum there, and what's the color of all the ornamentation there? It's wood, bone, shell, clay. It's all monochrome, tan, browns. And all of a sudden, these Europeans come along and go, check this out. Colors of the rainbow. Right here, not available in stores. Be the first on your blog. And so they're going, oh, I like those. And so these became more precious than they could even imagine. These came over with the explorers in the ships as ballast. This was cheap stuff. Where did it all come from? Most of it came from the island of Murano in Italy. They've been making glass there. They stole the recipe from the Egyptians. This has been going on for a long time, the glass bead trade. And so all these beads, these are the oldest ones they have, about 500 years old. These are called Manhattans. And because these are the style and the shape and the color and the vintage of the beads used to purchase Manhattan by the Dutch. 5 strands of beads, just like that. So the Indians had no way of manufacturing these. These were made out of glass, made in Czechoslovakia, Germany, Switzerland, China, Tibet. You can still find these. Well, you used to be able to find these in Tibet. But mostly, the bulk of them came from Italy. And they really still, Murano, if you've ever been there, is a huge glass manufacturing center of all kinds of art glass. So Lewis, had he known, the only ones they wanted were the blue ones. He wouldn't have taken this huge array. But they had about 50 pounds of beads, which wasn't nearly enough. They wouldn't have nearly enough supplies for this trip. As well planned as it was, how much did they have? About 30 tons, 50 to 60,000 pounds of equipment. So next time you're out on the highway and you see a semi go by, they average about 50,000 pounds of load in a semi tractor trailer. Now just imagine that much equipment. Now they didn't have all that equipment at the same time. You know, they're constantly, buying more stuff, especially when they were in St. Louis, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But just imagine, I'm sure in this area, how many of you like to go camping? Yeah, or do a river trip? How many of you do river trips? That's the best, because Lewis and Clark, it was 85% of it was a river trip. And it was usually going upstream, against the mighty Mississippi current and the mighty Missouri. And so of the 868 days of the trip, 2 years, 4 months, 10 days, about 580 of those days, they were setting up camp. And those camps were used for like 12 to 16 hours. They'd sit up in the late afternoon, set up the captain's tents, the mess pits, then the enlisted men's tents. And then the next morning, after they had their meal, all that stuff got packed away. And they did it day after day after day. Anybody done a Grand Canyon trip, multi-day? Yeah, we did a 21-day trip, just my brother and I, and then Nadine and I did a 16-day, just the two of us in our raft. And and you get into that routine every morning. And even after a 21-day trip, you got the routine down. I'm thinking, could I go another 800 days of doing this? Could you? I mean, it's just what you do. It just kind of becomes your default. It's just like, okay, everybody up, coffee's done, pack it up, boys, let's go, let's move. And so that's what they did, just a tremendous amount of physical labor to move this group of individuals and equipment upriver against the current is phenomenal. So we're going to talk about that more tomorrow. I will have I've got this picture I meant to show earlier. Of course, most people are familiar with these images of Meriwether Lewis here and Captain William Clark. Haven't talked too much about Clark yet. We'll cover him tomorrow, because tomorrow, most people, if you say, where did the trip start? Most people say St. Louis. But if you go back far enough, you can say it really started in Virginia, in Thomas Jefferson's head. He was the one that really put this all together. He'd been thinking about it for 20 years. But actually, the trip started here in Western Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, and then 980 miles down the Ohio. That was the first, but that was just Lewis. Clark's not there yet. So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. We're going to get him from Pittsburgh all the way to the Pacific. Thank you very much. Thank you. If you have any other questions, if you want to come up here and look around at these things, you're more than welcome to. Yeah, the only thing I will say that the tomahawk is sharp. Other than that, yeah, feel free to take a look, see. Thanks again.
How's it going? How are you? Good. Did you get my message back that you called me? Yeah, I watched the message. Yeah, I did. But I think I got whatever it was.